Welcome, dear listener, to Moonlight Audiobook. Tonight, we light a single candle in the dark and step into the shadowed halls of Compton Manor, where secrets smolder beneath velvet drapes and the past refuses to stay buried. In a house of old money and fading grandeur, a murder has shattered the illusion of civility. One woman lies dead, her truth silenced. But one man, precise, brilliant, unshakably calm, has come to lift the veil. This is no ordinary investigation. This is a battle of psychology, of hidden motives and elegant deceit. So wherever in the world you're tuning in from, get comfortable, dim the lights, and join me as we follow the footsteps of the legendary Belgian detective. This is Hercule Poirot, A Candle for the Dead. Chapter 1. The candle burns at both ends. It began with a scream. Not the kind that tears through the air like a siren, but a short, stifled cry, sharp enough to startle but swallowed almost instantly by the thick stone walls of Audiobook Manor. It was the sound of something private slipping into terror. The guests gathered downstairs, heads full of laughter and champagne, barely noticed it. Moments later, a second scream echoed, longer, more ragged. This time, silence fell like a dropped curtain. Lady Vivienne Arkwright, poised beside the fireplace in a gown of silver silk, turned sharply. Her pearl necklace trembled against her collarbone. The crystal flute in her hand slipped, shattered across the marble floor. All around her, guests froze mid-laugh, mid-step, mid-toast. The Schubert melody from the music room stopped abruptly. Sir Hugo Arkwright, tall and broad-shouldered even at 6'5", strode to the doorway with the decisive air of a man unaccustomed to disorder. "Clive!" he barked toward the hall. "What in God's name was that?" A voice returned, breathless and high-pitched. Sir, something's happened upstairs. The maid, she's screaming." Within minutes, the evening shattered completely. Guests abandoned their wine glasses and followed like curious shadows, whispering among themselves. At the end of the west corridor, Rosie, the youngest housemaid, stood rooted to the threshold of the blue room. Her hands clutched her apron, her knuckles white, and her face was the color of chalk. Sir Hugo pushed past her. Inside, the air was still and faintly sweet. The scent of violets mingled with something metallic. There, at the foot of the bed, lay the body of Miss Cordelia Compton. She was draped unnaturally, as if dropped by an unseen hand. One slipper lay by the dresser. Her head tilted sideways at a grotesque angle. The bodice of her dusky blue gown was soaked with blood, a pool darkening the pale carpet beneath her. Her eyes were open, locked in a silent expression of confusion or fear, perhaps both. A silver candlestick lay several feet away, knocked from its stand. Its base was stained red. One candle, still burning, flickered on the nearby writing desk, a solitary taper, untouched by breeze, casting long shadows across the room. By the time the local constable arrived, Audiobook Manor was no longer a scene of celebration. The household had become a closed circle, its occupants frozen between disbelief and suspicion. The drawing room was sealed. The doors were locked. The birthday fete had transformed into something closer to a wake, yet no one wept for Cordelia. Sir Hugo, grave and furious, gave his orders. "No one leaves until we know what's happened." 16 guests had been present that night. All of them had heard the screams. None had seen anything. Each had a version of the story, and none of them matched. Among them were Lady Vivienne Arkwright, refined and razor-witted, who kept her grief folded neatly behind lace and pearl. Julian Farrow, Sir Hugo's junior partner, known for ambition, who spoke little and watched too closely. Dr. Edith Ransom, a composed former war nurse and current psychiatrist, with a sharp gaze and unreadable manner. Sebastian Arkwright, the wayward son, newly returned from Brazil after a mysterious absence. Estelle Vaughan, Cordelia's close friend, outspoken and resentful of the aristocratic world she found herself in. Father Alcott, the visiting priest from the village parish, silent and solemn, as if already performing last rites. 16 guests. 1 murder. And every one of them, as Sir Hugo grimly noted, had reason to resent the victim. It was precisely 8 o'clock the following morning when the black car pulled into the gravel drive, its engine quiet, its driver discreet. Out stepped a small man dressed in a tailored overcoat and dove-grey gloves. His boots shone as if polished only minutes earlier. His moustache, symmetrical, styled, immaculate, curled upward with deliberate care. His gaze swept the facade of the manor with a blend of curiosity and calculation. He stood for a moment, breathing in the damp morning air, as if already decoding the secrets tucked within the manor's ancient stone. Then he turned to the constable waiting at the entrance. "You are Monsieur Finch?" he asked with courteous formality. The constable nodded, momentarily flustered by the man's precise manner. "Why, yes, sir. And you must be Hercule Poirot," the man said simply. With that, he stepped inside. Poirot entered the blue room first. The scene had not been disturbed. The body, now respectfully covered, had been documented but left untouched until further notice. Poirot walked slowly, never hurried, observing the scene with the intensity of a scholar studying a delicate manuscript. He paused near the writing desk. The candle still burned, a lone flame in a room that had no need of additional light the night before. The wax had melted down one side of the holder and pooled neatly at its base. Poirot bent to inspect the faint splatter beside the bed. Then he crossed to where the candlestick lay on the floor, crouched, and examined the dark stain upon its base. He did not touch anything. After several minutes, he stepped back into the hall, where Sir Hugo stood waiting. "I trust you see now why I asked for discretion," said the man stiffly. Poirot gave a small nod. "Indeed. It is not merely murder, monsieur. It is performance." Sir Hugo blinked. "I beg your pardon." Poirot gestured delicately toward the room. "This scene, it is arranged. Deliberately. It tells a story, but not the true one. I assume you mean to investigate fully." "But of course," Poirot said. "But first I must speak. Not only to the witnesses, to the suspects. They are the same in number, I think." Sir Hugo exhaled. "The police believe it was an intruder. A burglar, perhaps." Poirot turned. "Do you lock the upper floors from the inside?" "No." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, the doors were locked after the murder, no? And the guests? All present and accounted for?" "Yes." "Then I am afraid, monsieur, it is not a crime from outside." He paused, brushing an invisible speck of lint from his sleeve. "No, it is a crime of intimacy." By mid-morning, Poirot had made his preliminary observations. Rosie, the maid, was still in shock, unable to speak more than a few words. The constable had questioned her already, but Poirot made a note to return to her later. Servants saw things others did not, especially the ones no one noticed. The candle wax trail intrigued him most. It did not lead directly to the desk, but rather along the edge of the rug and then stopped, as if someone had walked with the lit candle in hand, placed it deliberately, and then vanished. But Poirot knew murderers did not vanish. They stayed. They watched. Often, they even mourned. He stepped into the drawing room where the guests had gathered once more, this time somber, quiet, and restless. Each held their grief differently. Some wore it like a badge. Others kept it behind their eyes. Poirot looked at them all. 16 guests. Each with motive. Each with alibi. And each with a reason to lie. The question was not who had killed Cordelia Compton. Not yet. First, he had to understand. Why had the candle been lit at all? That, he believed, was where the truth began to flicker. Chapter 2. The Watchers in the Drawing Room. A murder revealed much, but the living, Poirot knew, revealed more. That morning, the drawing room of L'Eglise Manor had become a gallery of frozen expressions. The guests, no longer merely guests but suspects, sat or stood in scattered silence. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and wilted roses. The servants had been dismissed. The curtains remained half-drawn, casting filtered light across the marble and velvet interior like a stage set awaiting its next act. Poirot observed them before speaking. He noted how Lady Vivienne Arkwright, seated nearest the hearth, had not removed her gloves, though the room was warm. Her posture was impeccable, elegant, stiff, but her eyes flitted to the grandfather clock every few moments, as if waiting for something to pass. Julian Farrow, the junior partner, had taken a solitary chair beside the window. His hands remained clasped, his brow furrowed not in sorrow, but in thought. The kind of thought that rewrites the past to better protect the present. Sebastian Arkwright, the prodigal son, lounged against the sideboard. But the pose was forced. The rhythm of his foot tapping against the wooden leg betrayed him. Dr. Edith Ransom stood, arms crossed, examining a faded portrait above the fireplace as if it too might lie. Estelle Vaughan, dressed in navy and midnight blue, stared at the floor with her lips pressed tightly together, as if one word might undo her. And in the far corner, near the side table with the empty decanter, stood Father Alcott, silent, unmoving, his eyes never straying from Poirot. The detective allowed the silence to stretch just long enough. Then he stepped forward, smiling gently. "I thank you all for your patience," he said. "And I assure you, I am not here to accuse, only to understand." No one responded. Poirot continued. "Each of you knew Mademoiselle Compton, some more closely than others. But no one dies in such a manner without leaving behind echoes." He turned to Lady Vivienne first. She blinked, as if pulled from reverie. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot." "You knew Miss Compton for how long, madam?" 3 years. She came to us first as a temporary secretary during my husband's illness. He kept her on. "And you? Were you fond of her?" Vivienne hesitated. Her voice was cool. She was efficient. Never late. "In my experience, that is rare enough." "You speak of her professionally," Poirot said lightly. "And personally." A pause. "She was distant. Always polite. She didn't encourage closeness." Poirot nodded. "And yet, you hosted her here for several weeks." Vivienne's lips tightened. Hugo insisted. She'd been helping him draft some new trust documents. Cordelia was thorough. He valued that. Poirot noted the name. Not Miss Compton. Not the poor girl. Just Cordelia. Personal. Possibly too personal. He moved on. "Monsieur Farrow." Julian looked up slowly. "Yes. You work with Sir Hugo?" "Partner in Arkwright Consolidated. He brought me on last year." "And your relationship with Miss Compton?" "She handled the filing and correspondence. I rarely spoke to her." Poirot studied him. "You rarely spoke to a woman who managed the legal affairs of your partner." Julian's jaw tensed. She and Sir Hugo had their own system. She was loyal to him. Almost fanatically so. "Fanaticism is a strong word, monsieur." Julian shrugged. She took pride in her influence. She wasn't exactly shy about it. Poirot waited. "You disliked her." "I didn't trust her." "Ah," Poirot thought. "And there it is. Next came Sebastian. He wore his collar slightly open, a sign of rebellion that had dulled with age. He had the arkwright cheekbones, but the rest of him sagged with excess and consequence. "You returned only days ago," Poirot said. "Yes, from Sao Paulo." "For what purpose?" "Invitation." Sebastian smirked faintly. "Birthday parties are family affairs, aren't they? And how did you feel about Miss Compton?" Sebastian's smile vanished. "She didn't like me. Thought I was a disgrace to the family name. Told father I was unfit to inherit." Poirot raised his brows. "Did she say this to you?" "She didn't have to. My father repeated it. Often." "So you felt threatened?" Sebastian's fingers curled slightly. "No. Just insulted. I don't kill women because they talk too much." Poirot gave a short bow of the head. "Of course not, monsieur. But one must always consider the emotional temperature of a house. That is where the seeds are sown." He turned to Dr. Ransom. "You are a psychiatrist, I understand." "Among other things. I met Vivienne during a wellness lecture in London. She invited me for the weekend." "And Miss Compton?" "She was bright. Controlled. Too controlled. That always interests me." "In what way?" "She never blinked too much. Never laughed too loudly. She guarded everything. That kind of composure is rarely natural. It's constructed for protection or concealment." "You make her sound dangerous." Dr. Ransom's voice was calm. "Everyone is dangerous in the right context." Poirot made a mental note. "And now, Estelle Vaughan." Her voice came out brittle. "You want to know if I killed her?" Poirot gave a small smile. "I wish to know what you know, mademoiselle." "She was my friend," Estelle said tightly. "But she didn't confide in me like she used to. Not in the last month." "Why not?" "I don't know. She started acting differently. She was writing letters, locking drawers, hiding things." Poirot's eyes brightened. "Letters?" Estelle nodded. "I saw her sealing envelopes late one night. She seemed nervous." "To whom were they addressed?" "I don't know. I wasn't snooping. But it frightened her when I asked. She said I should stay out of things I didn't understand." "And did she seem afraid of someone?" Estelle hesitated. "She seemed afraid of everyone." Lastly, Poirot turned to Father Alcott. "You were in the drawing room when the scream was heard?" "Yes." "And your impression of Miss Compton?" "I knew her only briefly. We spoke once about scripture. She was intelligent, thoughtful." "Do you believe she had enemies in this house?" The priest folded his hands. "Monsieur Poirot, the dead keep their secrets. But the living, they wear them in their faces." Poirot studied him a moment longer. "That is very true, mon père." With the interviews complete, Poirot returned to the hallway. The candle still sat on the writing desk in the blue room, its wick now cold and curled. He stared at it for a long while. Rosie, the maid, passed him quietly with a fresh tray of tea. Her footsteps paused at the door. Poirot turned to her gently. "You saw her first?" Rosie nodded. "And you lit the candle?" "No, sir. It was already burning." Poirot's gaze returned to the desk. "Monsieur," said the constable, stepping beside him. "You've heard them all now. What do you think?" Poirot folded his hands. "I think," he said slowly, "that the murderer is not simply one who struck a fatal blow, but one who needed an audience. That is why the candle was lit. Not for light." He turned away from the desk. "But for drama." Chapter 3. The First False Lead. The third day after Cordelia Compton's death dawned bleak and wind-stirred, casting a chill even inside the manor's thick stone walls. Outside, the hedgerows rustled beneath a pale sky, and the fountain in the inner courtyard babbled with a hollow sound, like a voice speaking in riddles. Hercule Poirot, however, was not one to be distracted by the melancholy of weather. His grey eyes had settled on something more intriguing, the matter of the desk drawer. After receiving Constable Reeves' report that a locked drawer in Miss Compton's room had resisted all efforts to open it, Poirot insisted on handling the matter personally. Now, standing before the finely carved desk in the blue room, he examined the small brass keyhole with all the reverence of a scholar before a sacred manuscript. He gently inserted a thin wire, manipulated the mechanism delicately, and, click, the drawer yielded. Inside, bound by a faded ribbon, were 3 letters and a folded legal document. Poirot slipped on a pair of gloves and examined the first letter. It was dated 2 weeks prior. Dear Cordelia, you mustn't press him any further. He's on edge. The matter with the old trust is dangerous enough. Don't stir the ashes. J. There was only one J in the household, Julian Farrow. The second letter was more cryptic. He doesn't know I read it. But I did. The first clause is altered. The date is forged. If it comes to light, he's ruined. E. Estelle? The third was unaddressed. A draft, perhaps. Cordelia's own writing, firm and elegant. If anything happens to me, search for the silver frame in Hugo's study. There's more than a photograph inside. Poirot folded the letter slowly. Beneath it, the legal document, stamped and notarized, was a last-minute codicil to Sir Hugo Arkwright's will. It transferred his estate, in full, not to Sebastian, but to an unnamed charitable trust Cordelia had recently registered in London. The implications were explosive. Later that morning, Poirot met with Inspector Flint in the study. The inspector was broad-shouldered and skeptical, a man allergic to anything less than blunt conclusions. You think this Farrow fellow had something to do with it? Flint asked, reading over the letters Poirot had set before him. He had motive, Poirot said mildly. And so, it appears, did Mademoiselle Vaughan, if she knew someone had forged a clause in the will. Flint grunted. But why kill the secretary? She wasn't even family. Precisely, Poirot said, tapping the desk. Because she was not family, she had no inherited loyalty. That made her dangerous. And this codicil, was it valid? Poirot nodded. It is dated and witnessed, but it would not have stood unchallenged. Wouldn't it have disinherited the son entirely? Yes, and perhaps embarrassed others. Sir Hugo was not as detached from Cordelia as he let on. You mean? Poirot raised a hand. I suggest nothing yet. Only this, the woman was more than a secretary. She was a lever, placed very precisely, beneath a delicate machine. The rumor spread through the household like spilled ink. Cordelia had left behind something damning. Estelle Vaughan, caught whispering with Rosie near the stairs, became the first to crack. I didn't kill her, she told Poirot that afternoon, pacing the corner of the conservatory. I swear it. I only told her to be careful. She'd been pushing Sir Hugo, asking questions about the trust fund he set up for that school in Manchester. She said something didn't add up. Poirot observed her coolly. And did it not? I wouldn't know, but she believed someone had altered the documents. And you wrote her a note about it? I had to. I didn't want to speak aloud. The walls in this house are thinner than you think. And who do you think had the most to lose? Estelle's eyes fluttered. Julian. Or maybe even Hugo. I don't know. She said she'd found proof. Poirot raised a brow. And did she show it to you? No. She hid things. She said even I wasn't safe. By late afternoon, suspicion had narrowed around Julian Farrow. Constable Reeves reported that Farrow had gone for a walk toward the Southern Cliff Trail shortly after Cordelia was discovered. No alibi, no witnesses. When questioned again, Farrow grew tense. "You think I killed her over some trust document?" he snapped. "I didn't even know she'd altered the will." Poirot responded calmly. "Yet you wrote her a letter, urging her not to stir the ashes." Farrow looked stunned. "How do you?" "I read it," Poirot said simply. "And more importantly, I understand it." Farrow's mouth worked in silence. "I warned her," he said finally. "I warned her because I knew someone else would snap. I was trying to keep her safe." "From whom?" "I thought maybe Sebastian. Or even Sir Hugo himself. He hated being challenged." "Did you know about the codicil?" "No," Julian said. "I swear it. She never showed it to me. She said she wanted it to be a surprise, the final chess move." Poirot studied him in silence, then nodded slowly. "Very well." He left Farrow standing amid the falling dust of his own defense. That evening, as storm clouds crept across the horizon and dinner was served in subdued tones, Poirot remained notably quiet. He retired early, declining his usual tisane. But in truth, he did not sleep. He waited, and shortly after midnight, footsteps creaked outside his door. Poirot slipped out silently and followed. The figure moved swiftly down the main corridor, past the portrait gallery, and into Sir Hugo's study. Poirot waited, then entered moments later without sound. There, by the fireplace, Dr. Edith Ransom stood with a silver frame in her hand. Poirot cleared his throat. She spun. "You," she whispered. "Indeed," said Poirot. "May I ask what you hope to find?" She held out the frame. "I wasn't stealing. I read the note Estelle found. I wanted to see if it was true." He examined the frame. Hidden behind the photograph of a fox hunt was a folded letter. He opened it. It was written in Cordelia's hand. "Sir Hugo changed the will without telling anyone. He wanted me to protect it, to ensure it passed through without interference. If anything happens, know this: the second witness on the codicil is forged. Julian had nothing to do with it. The forgery came from within the family." Poirot looked up. "Madam," he said, "I believe we have been deceived not once, but twice." Chapter 4: A House of Masks. The morning after Poirot's midnight encounter with Dr. Ransom dawned thick with unease. Storm clouds had broken in the early hours, leaving the estate drenched and the windows streaked with rain. Inside Compton Manor, the silence was no longer mournful, it was expectant. Sir Hugo Arkwright called for an emergency meeting in the drawing room just after breakfast. The household gathered reluctantly. Sebastian, looking as though he'd barely slept. Estelle, nervously twisting a lace handkerchief. Julian, pale but composed. Rosie, watchful as ever. And Dr. Ransom, with eyes that refused to meet anyone's. Sir Hugo stood near the hearth. Behind him, the portrait of his late wife loomed. The same woman whose illness had once confined Cordelia to a nursemaid's life, and whose death had changed the course of many futures. "Poirot," Sir Hugo said grimly, "has informed me that someone forged the name of a witness on my final codicil. I need not tell you what that means, legally or morally." He looked to Poirot, who stood with arms folded, his expression unreadable. "No outsider would have had access to that document," Hugo continued. "So I must assume, however bitterly, that the betrayal came from within these walls." Poirot did not interrupt. He allowed the silence to settle and harden like drying plaster. Julian broke first. "Do you mean one of us altered your will?" Someone certainly tried to. Hugo's gaze lingered on his son. Sebastian rose to his feet. If this is about the estate, I've never cared for it. Everyone knows I'm going abroad when this is over. Take your suspicions elsewhere. Poirot's voice cut through the room. Forgive me, Monsieur Arkwright, but if we are to seek the truth, we must do so without pride. May I ask, who did witness your codicil? Hugo hesitated. Cordelia brought in 2 of the household staff. I never saw them sign it. She said it was a formality. Poirot inclined his head. Then perhaps it was never witnessed properly at all. A hush followed. Poirot turned. Madame Ransom, he said softly, may I speak with you privately? In the corridor beyond the drawing room, Poirot and Dr. Ransom walked slowly. You knew more than you admitted last night, he began. I suspected more, she replied. Cordelia confided in me during her final days. Not about the codicil, but about Sir Hugo. In what way? She feed him. Poirot stopped. Ah, that is not something said lightly. She was convinced he was watching her, testing her. She used to joke that Compton Manor wasn't a home, but a stage, and we were all just players in Hugo's little drama. Did you believe her? Dr. Ransom hesitated. I began to. Then I must ask again, where were you the night she died? She stiffened. In my room, reading. I fell asleep with the lamp on. Poirot nodded, but noted the tremor in her voice. Lies, he had found, were often whispered through hesitation rather than contradiction. By mid-afternoon, Poirot had turned his attention to Rosie the maid. Her movements, he observed, were sharper than they needed to be. She listened more than she cleaned. And she always appeared where the conversation grew interesting. When he found her in the servants' corridor, he addressed her directly. Rosie, you saw Cordelia the day she died? Yes, sir. Took her tea around 10:30. Did she seem afraid? No more than usual. Poirot raised a brow. She was regularly afraid. Rosie hesitated, then lowered her voice. She had nightmares. Started about a month ago. Woke up screaming once. I found her clutching an old rosary, shaking like a leaf. Did she say what she dreamt of? No, sir. But she always said the same thing. It's not the devil that frightens me. It's the face it hides behind. Poirot paused. Did she confide in you about the codicil? No, sir. But she wrote a lot of letters last week. Burned them in the study fireplace. Burned? Yes. I saw the ashes myself. Tied with ribbon. She said no one should read them, not yet. Poirot's mind moved quickly. Did you notice if anyone else handled them before they were destroyed? Rosie swallowed. I saw Estelle in the study that morning. The letters were gone that night. That evening, Poirot sat alone in the blue room, the fire burning low, the storm now only a memory in the smell of wet stone. On the desk before him, he arranged the known facts. Cordelia discovered a forged clause in Sir Hugo's will. She intended to reveal it, possibly through legal channels. Someone forged a witness signature on the new codicil, someone with knowledge of the household staff. Julian Farrow warned her off. Estelle may have known more than she claimed. Cordelia left a note implying the forger was from within the family. But which family? The possibility nagged at him. Had he made an error of framing? Had he assumed the household was limited to blood alone? He considered again Cordelia's role, the nurse-turned-secretary, the quiet observer, the keeper of secrets. Then he thought of Sebastian's absence, Dr. Ransom's proximity, Julian's dual motives, Estelle's fear, and Rose's watchful silence. But one thread emerged, brighter than the rest. The codicil had been witnessed, or claimed to be, by staff. But no staff member had yet confirmed signing it. He stood abruptly and went in search of the butler, Mr. Greaves. Greaves was polishing silver in the lower pantry when Poirot arrived. "Mr. Greaves," he said gently, "I need to ask you a delicate question. Were you ever asked to sign a document for Miss Compton?" The butler blinked. "No, sir. Not I." Poirot nodded slowly. "And were you aware of any staff member doing so?" Greaves frowned. "Now that you mention it, Millie, the scullery maid, told me something strange. Said Cordelia had asked her to fetch someone else, but when she returned, the door was locked. She heard voices, one of them a man's. Said she thought it was Sir Hugo himself, but she wasn't sure." Poirot pressed his fingers together. A man's voice. Not a member of staff. Not even a trusted one. But someone pretending, or hiding. He returned to the blue room with a new theory forming like condensation on glass. The forged name was not a staff name at all. It was a family member pretending to be one. And then the final detail returned to him. Cordelia's last letter, the one hidden behind the photograph. The second witness is forged. Julian had nothing to do with it. Which meant someone wanted Julian implicated, by design. A frame within a frame. A killer who knew exactly how to make Poirot look the wrong way first. Chapter 5. The Man Behind the Curtain. Compton Manor was beginning to feel like a theatre whose actors were slowly realizing they had not been cast in the roles they believed. In the dining room that morning, conversation had grown cautious, even fractured. Sebastian's glib remarks were gone. Estelle kept to herself. Julian brooded behind his coffee. Sir Hugo, meanwhile, read the paper in silence, unread, unseeing. Poirot took his toast with marmalade and observed them all. It was time to stir the waters. "I wonder," he said lightly, "what each of you thinks Cordelia intended to do with the codicil once she discovered the forgery." Sir Hugo looked up. "That depends. Are you suggesting she was murdered because of it?" "Mon ami, I do not suggest, I inquire. Cordelia had no great wealth, no real enemies, no life beyond this house. Her only danger was knowledge." Julian snorted. "Knowledge is rarely fatal." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Oh, but it is, monsieur, when it threatens someone else's comfort." He left the table soon after, stepping outside to walk the perimeter of the estate. The air was crisp, the hedgerows slick with dew, and the scent of wet earth clung to every breath. He made his way toward the gardener's cottage, where a small greenhouse stood behind a crumbling wall. Rosie had mentioned Cordelia burning letters. Poirot had not yet seen the ashes for himself. But as he passed the rear of the greenhouse, a faint metallic glint caught his eye. Behind a panel of moss-covered stones was an old incinerator bin, its lid warped with age. It looked long unused, but not recently so. With a handkerchief, he lifted the lid. Inside lay blackened paper, still faintly curled. He retrieved a scrap. Most of it had burned away, but the bottom corner remained, scorched and brittle. In Cordelia's handwriting were the words, "Not forgive Julian, but he is not the forger." Poirot folded the piece carefully into his pocket. So it was confirmed. Someone wanted Julian to be the scapegoat. But who stood to gain from that? That afternoon, Poirot requested a private word with Julian Farrow. They met in the library, where the fire had been recently lit and a faint scent of cedar lingered in the air. "You strike me, monsieur, as a man who resents the past but cannot quite escape it." Julian raised a brow. "I don't recall inviting psychological analysis. And yet you are surrounded by unresolved matters, one of which is your engagement to Estelle Arkwright. Is it truly as amicable as it appears?" Julian's expression hardened. What are you implying? That she may no longer trust you, and you may no longer care. Julian stood, walked to the window. Cordelia knew. She saw it. Estelle and I, we were arranged like furniture in this house. Convenient. Presentable. And you, monsieur, resented that. Julian turned. I pitied her. Cordelia. She believed people could change their lives if they just found the courage. But Compton Manor doesn't allow that. It keeps you. It feeds on obligation. Poirot studied him a moment longer. Did you visit Cordelia the night she died? Julian flinched, ever so slightly. Yes. Around 11. I brought her some documents from my office. What documents? Financial ones. She was managing some investments for the estate. Poirot tilted his head. But she was dying. She wanted to leave something behind. Something clean. So she arranged for the estate's smaller trusts to be given away, to nurses' charities, I think. Sir Hugo didn't know. Ah, Poirot murmured. Secrets within secrets. Julian nodded. She was afraid, you know, of becoming nothing. Said dying wasn't half as terrifying as dying invisible. Poirot tucked that thought away. Noted it. Cordelia had not only discovered a forgery. She had begun correcting wrongs. Quietly. Persistently. A dangerous thing in a house built on control. That evening, Poirot requested to see Estelle Arkwright in the study. She arrived wearing pale blue, her hair swept into a chignon too formal for the hour. I know why you've called me, she said quickly. Oh! You think I had something to do with Cordelia's death? Poirot did not answer at first. He gestured for her to sit. I think, he said at last, that you knew Cordelia better than most, and that your loyalty to your family is more fragile than you would admit. Estelle looked at the fireplace. I didn't hate Cordelia, but I envied her. She had no claim to this house, yet she held more power in her silence than I ever did in my birthright. Did you alter the codicil? No. Did you see who did? She hesitated. I found the open safe 2 days before she died. The codicil was inside, but the witness name was already written. Did you recognize it? It was signed by Edith Trenner. But we haven't had a maid by that name in 5 years. Poirot leaned forward. And you said nothing. Who would I tell? My father? He'd have buried it. Julian? He would have blamed himself. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Or perhaps you feared that uncovering the truth would destroy what little harmony remained. She stood abruptly. You don't understand, Monsieur Poirot. In this house, loyalty isn't earned. It's inherited, whether you want it or not. He watched her go. Another mask slipping. Later that night, Poirot examined Cordelia's remaining possessions. Among her papers was a single note, wedged inside the pages of a devotional book. It had escaped previous searches, hidden in quiet faith. If anything happens to me, the answer lies not in the codicil, but in the witness who never was. I saw the face behind the name. He thought I wouldn't know. Poirot stared at the words. He thought I wouldn't know. Cordelia had recognized the voice, the manner, the mask. Someone had posed as a maid. Signed as a woman long gone. A forgery by presence, not just pen. But only one person had the motive, the access, and the subtlety. Poirot stood and straightened his cuffs. He would summon them all tomorrow. The stage had been set. Chapter 6. The Gathering Storm. By the time the grandfather clock in Compton Manor's drawing room struck 11, the household had gathered at Poirot's quiet insistence. The room, heavy with shadow despite the hour, was arranged with care, not unlike a stage set for the final act of a well-rehearsed play. Sir Hugo occupied the high-backed armchair near the hearth, his shoulders hunched, the whiskey in his glass forgotten. Estelle sat beside him, upright and unmoving, like a sculpture preserved by grief. Julian leaned against the piano, eyes dark with suspicion, while Sebastian lounged with feigned ease on the chaise, his boots crossed and polished to gleam. Only Rosie kept to the far wall, half hidden behind the heavy curtains, her eyes darting from face to face. Poirot stood before the fireplace, immaculate and composed. He adjusted his cuffs with a surgeon's precision. "You will forgive me," he began, "for gathering you in this way. But there are matters, delicate and urgent, that must now be placed into the light." Julian gave a dry chuckle. "If you've come to accuse us of something, get on with it." "Patience, monsieur. Let us first consider what we already know." He turned slowly, addressing them all. Cordelia was no fool. She was deliberate. If she burned letters, it was because she knew their contents could be fatal, not just socially, but criminally. She discovered that the codicil, naming her as heir, had been forged. But she did not accuse. She observed. She waited. Sebastian raised a brow. If she knew, why didn't she say anything? Because she was cleverer than any of you suspected. She intended to expose the forger in her own time, and perhaps, to offer mercy before justice. But someone decided to act first. Poirot paused, letting the words settle. Sir Hugo set down his glass. "And you believe that someone murdered her?" "I do not believe, monsieur. I am certain." A breath caught Rose's. She sank further into the curtains. Poirot stepped toward her, gently. "Mademoiselle, you saw something the night Cordelia died, did you not?" Rosie shook her head quickly. "No, I only heard voices. I didn't see." He waited. She faltered. "Well, I saw someone leaving her room, just before midnight." "And you said nothing?" "I didn't want to get involved. I thought it was Julian. I mean, it looked like him." Julian stood upright. "I wasn't there past 11:30. I told you, I gave her papers and left." "And yet," Poirot murmured, "someone returned." He crossed to the mantel and removed a folded piece of scorched paper from his breast pocket. "This is what remains of a letter Cordelia burned. It reads, 'Not forgive Julian. But he is not the forger.'" A stunned silence. Estelle spoke next, her voice tight. "Then who is?" Poirot looked at her. "You know who signed the codicil, mademoiselle?" Estelle nodded slowly. "It was Edith Trenner. A name from years ago. A maid who left long before Cordelia's time." Poirot turned back to the others. "The signature is false. But more than that, it was witnessed by someone who knew Cordelia would recognize the name, and think little of it. A casual deception. But Cordelia did not overlook it." He moved to the center of the room. "There are only 3 people who had access to the safe in the study: Sir Hugo, Julian, and Sebastian. Of these, only one would benefit directly from Cordelia's sudden death, and from the codicil being invalidated." He faced Sir Hugo. "You, monsieur." Sir Hugo stiffened. "Are you accusing me of killing my own niece?" "No, not yet. But I accuse you of knowing the forgery was committed, and staying silent. You had too much to lose. Cordelia's death means her claim disappears. The original will, naming you, remains intact." Sir Hugo's face darkened. "This is outrageous." "But you did not forge the codicil," Poirot continued. "You lack the nerve for that." He turned sharply to Sebastian. "You, monsieur, are a gambler. A man drowning in debts. I have confirmed as much with my contacts in Monte Carlo. You returned to England suddenly, just before Cordelia's diagnosis became public. She was dying. You saw opportunity. Sebastian stood now, arms folded. I never touched the will. But you knew she had one. And you knew, more importantly, that Cordelia trusted people too easily. You offered to help with legal arrangements. Yes? You suggested the name Edith Trenner. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. And if I did? Poirot stepped closer. Cordelia realized too late. She confronted you, didn't she? Silence. Then. She said she'd change it, Sebastian murmured. Said she'd destroy the forged one and write a new version. One that left it all to charity. And so, Poirot said softly, you went to her room that night. You brought a glass of warm milk, as was her habit. But Cordelia never drank it. She recognized your voice. Your fear. She saw the truth. Sebastian laughed bitterly. You think I poisoned her? No, monsieur. You smothered her. No signs of trauma. No noise. A pillow pressed just long enough to be certain. Then you returned to your room, washed your hands, and waited. Sebastian's face was pale now. Sir Hugo stood, furious. This is madness. My son is a desperate man, Poirot said coldly, but not without conscience. He turned to Rosie. You saw him, didn't you? Her voice was a whisper. I thought it was Julian. But now, I'm not sure. The coat was different. Shorter. And he walked faster. Poirot nodded. Messy. Sebastian stared at her. You little. Poirot raised a hand. No threats, monsieur. It is over. And I think you know it. Sebastian sagged into the nearest chair. She was going to give it all away. To strangers. Cordelia had no idea what this house meant. What we needed. She was going to burn it to the ground. And so, Poirot said gently, you beat her to it. Chapter 7. A Legacy of Ashes. The storm outside Compton Manor had crept in unnoticed, thunder murmuring along the hills like distant artillery. Inside the drawing room, silence reigned after Poirot's pronouncement, thick and suffocating. Sebastian sat hunched in the chair, elbows on knees, face buried in his hands. Sir Hugo stood behind him, unmoving, as if frozen by grief or disbelief. Julian leaned against the mantel, arms folded, jaw clenched. Estelle clutched a lace handkerchief but did not weep. And Rosie, still pressed near the curtains, watched everything with wide, uncertain eyes. Poirot remained composed. There was no triumph in his face, only gravity. I have laid before you the facts as they are, he said quietly. Now we must look beyond them. Estelle's voice was barely a whisper. What do you mean? Poirot steepled his fingers. Sebastian killed Cordelia to silence her. Yes. But it was not merely about inheritance. That is only the surface. There is something deeper, older, rooted in the soil of this family. A rot that began long before Cordelia's return. Sir Hugo flinched. Julian stared at Poirot, sharp-eyed. Go on. Poirot moved toward the fireplace, as if warming his thoughts there. Cordelia's notes, which I found hidden inside the spine of a medical journal, reveal a far more troubling discovery. She had begun to suspect not only a forgery but also something more sinister, a deliberate pattern of coercion and concealment in the family's dealings. And at the center of that pattern stood you, Sir Hugo. Sir Hugo's face darkened. What are you implying? That your reputation, your knighthood, your charitable legacy, it is built on carefully arranged illusions. Estelle looked at her father. Is that true? Sir Hugo's voice cracked. You don't know what it was like, After the war, this house was crumbling. We had debts from generations before. I had to rebuild it, restore our name. Poirot nodded. And to do so, you falsified estate records, forged titles, even rerouted trust funds intended for war widows. A stunned gasp escaped Rosie. You cannot prove this, Sir Hugo spat. Oh, but Cordelia could, Poirot replied softly. She had receipts, correspondence, ledgers hidden behind a false panel in her wardrobe. She planned to deliver them to her solicitor this week. Estelle turned slowly to her father, voice low and raw. You let her die. Sir Hugo's mouth opened, but no words came. He looked to Sebastian, whose head remained bowed, and then to Julian. And you, Poirot said, pivoting, you knew as well. Julian's jaw tightened. Not until recently. Cordelia told me about it the day before she died. She said I had a choice, to help her expose it, or to walk away. Yet you said nothing. I was afraid, Julian said. Afraid of what it would do to all of us. Poirot gave a sad nod. So you waited. And she died. And you became silent once more. A fresh silence fell. Poirot turned now to Rosie. You have lived among these people for many years, mademoiselle. You've been invisible to them. No? And yet you've seen everything. She blinked. I suppose. Cordelia trusted you. She left you something in her final letter, a request. Rose's lips trembled. She said, if anything happened to her, I should go to the press. That her story had to be told. Do you still have that letter? She nodded, and slowly drew it from the inside of her cardigan. Poirot took it, studied the handwriting, and carefully returned it. It will help bring the truth into the light, he said gently. Sebastian finally raised his head. So what now? You turn me in. Poirot considered him for a long moment. You took a life to protect a lie. That lie will be dismantled, monsieur. Brick by brick. I have already telegraphed the Home Office. A full investigation will follow. Julian stepped forward. And the estate? That, Poirot said, will be for the courts to decide. But Cordelia's final, valid testament, her real will, signed and witnessed properly by her physician and solicitor, is now in my possession. Estelle gasped. She made another one. Poirot nodded. She hid it in a hollowed-out history book, The Wars of the Roses. Most appropriate, non. And who does it name? Poirot looked to Rosie. She left it to a fund for orphan children and medical aid, with a personal bequest to Rosie and a small stipend to Estelle. Sir Hugo staggered to a chair. It's all gone, then, he muttered. Poirot said nothing. The grandfather clock struck midnight. The storm broke at last, rain lashing against the windows. Poirot stood straight, buttoning his coat. I must go. Inspector Bray is en route. He will handle what remains. Julian stepped toward him. You won't be staying. I have done what I came to do. My work is in bringing truth to the surface, not in what others choose to do with it. Estelle met his gaze. Thank you, for not letting her death be forgotten. Poirot's eyes softened. She was a brave woman, and she deserved better than shadows and secrets. He paused at the threshold. One last thing, he added. The candle she lit every night? She called it her watchlight, a flame against the dark. Let it burn again, in memory, and let what remains be built on truth, not ashes. And with that, he stepped into the storm, his silhouette swallowed by the rain. Chapter 8. The Inspector Arrives. The dawn crept across the Somerset hills with pale reluctance, like a nervous guest entering a house that had seen too much grief. The gravel outside Compton Manor crackled under heavy tires. A black motorcar, rain-slick and official-looking, rolled to a halt beneath the portico. Inspector John Bray stepped out, tall and stolid, with sharp cheekbones and a trench coat that hadn't been dry in days. He paused for only a moment to take in the weary grandeur of the manor, then approached the front door with a purposeful gait. Inside, the drawing-room still bore the chill of the night's revelations. Estelle sat beside the fireplace, pale and motionless. Julian stood near the liquor cabinet, though the glass in his hand remained untouched. Sir Hugo had not come down, and Sebastian, now watched closely by one of the local constables, sat in the corner like a man waiting for an axe. Poirot met the inspector at the threshold, greeting him with a formal nod. "Monsieur Bray, I believe you have been fully briefed. I received your telegram and followed it with a call to the local authorities," Bray said, removing his gloves. "Quite the tangle you've uncovered, Monsieur Poirot, but I know better than to doubt your instincts." Poirot allowed himself a faint smile. "I have merely brushed away the dust. The structure was always there." They moved into the room. Bray's gaze swept over the remaining occupants. Sebastian didn't look up. "I understand the suspect confessed last night?" Bray asked. Poirot inclined his head. "Under the weight of evidence and guilt, yes." "And the motive?" "Preservation. Of wealth, of image, of illusion." Bray gave a terse nod. "I'll need to record formal statements." "And the weapon?" Poirot turned to a small writing desk in the corner. Cordelia was struck with a blunt object, a paperweight. Heavy bronze. It was cleaned and placed back on her desk, but small traces of blood remained in the groove beneath. Bray examined it closely. "Sloppy." Poirot tilted his head. Or perhaps, in haste and panic, perfection was abandoned. Estelle spoke. "Finally. What happens to him now?" "He'll be taken into custody," Bray said, matter-of-factly. "He'll face formal charges. There will be an inquiry and likely a trial." Sebastian stood with difficulty, as if his body already bore the weight of his sentence. He said nothing, only allowed the constable to lead him from the room. As he passed Poirot, their eyes met. No hatred, no plea, only resignation. When the door closed behind him, Bray let out a long breath. "A shame. His father was a friend of my superior in London. There was promise in that boy, once." Poirot murmured, "We all begin as something else." He turned then to Rosie, who stood hesitantly by the door. "The letter Cordelia left you, it is now in the inspector's hands. It will strengthen the case." She nodded. "I understand." "You did the right thing, mademoiselle," Poirot added gently. "And I believe Cordelia knew you would." Estelle rose and crossed the room to her. "You could have left. But you stayed. Thank you." A flicker of emotion crossed Rose's face, one she quickly mastered. Bray addressed Poirot again. "You also mentioned Cordelia's other documents." Poirot retrieved a folder from the side table, sealed and organized. "These are copies of the ledgers and letters she recovered from her investigation into the family trust. They support her claim that Sir Hugo diverted funds and falsified charity accounts." "I'll arrange a forensic audit," Bray said. "Likely charges for fraud and breach of trust." At that moment, Julian broke his silence. "You'll want to look at the Compton House account in Geneva. I believe that's where the missing money ended up." Bray gave him a long look. "And how long have you known this?" "Since yesterday." Julian's voice was hoarse. "After Cordelia told me the truth." Poirot studied him. "A timely revelation, monsieur." Julian met his gaze without blinking. "I'm not proud of it." But if there's any way to set things right now. Poirot gave a slow nod. Redemption is not a thing that comes in comfort, monsieur. But perhaps, in time. Sir Hugo entered at last, walking like a man who had aged decades overnight. His dressing gown hung loose. His eyes were sunken. "So it's done," he said hollowly. "My son, my legacy." Bray stepped forward. "Sir Hugo, I'll need to ask you a series of questions regarding financial records and charitable holdings." Sir Hugo slumped into a chair. Yes. Of course." Poirot approached him quietly. "Do you regret it, monsieur?" Sir Hugo looked at him slowly, as if surprised by the question. "I regret not stopping it sooner," he said. "Cordelia warned me. She offered me mercy in return for confession. But he broke off, voice brittle. "I had come to believe the lie was the only thing holding this family together." Poirot looked toward the window, where morning light finally breached the grey. "But lies, monsieur, make for poor foundations. And like all rot, they eventually surface." He stepped away, leaving Sir Hugo with his crumbling thoughts. Inspector Bray turned to Poirot. "You've done it again, sir. Though I don't imagine this one gave you much pleasure." Poirot's eyes flicked toward the fireplace, where a single candle still burned, Cordelia's watchlight. "No," he said softly. "There are cases that challenge the mind, and those that burden the heart." He paused. "But in both, the truth must out." The inspector nodded, and began issuing orders to his men. Poirot walked to the window, peering into the wet garden beyond. The manor stood quiet now, less a home than a mausoleum of pride and misdeeds. But somewhere beneath the ruin, truth had sparked a flame. Let it burn. Chapter 9. The Letter from Geneva. The air inside Compton Manor hung heavier now, not with mystery, but with the weight of truth. Sebastian was gone. The storm had passed. Yet Poirot, as always, sensed that the final thread had not yet been drawn tight. Closure was a delicate thing, and for Poirot, only completeness would do. The morning post arrived late, as if uncertain whether it should intrude. Mrs. Whitlow brought the silver tray into the drawing room, where Poirot sat, meticulously folding his handkerchief after a modest breakfast of coffee and toast. "Post from Switzerland, sir," she said, placing a cream envelope on the tray. "Marked urgent. Geneva bank seal." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "Merci, madame," he said quietly. He took the envelope with delicate precision, examined the seal, then carefully broke it. Inside was a typed letter and several enclosures, ledgers, account statements, a sworn affidavit. He read in silence, and when he was finished, he gave the faintest of sighs. At that moment, Estelle entered, dressed in deep green, eyes cautious but composed. "More news?" she asked. Poirot gestured to the seat across from him. "Please, mademoiselle. There is something I must explain." She sat, hands clasped. Poirot lifted the letter. This arrived from Banque du Leman. In it, the managing director confirms that the account in the name of Compton House Charitable Holdings was established 9 years ago, not by Sir Hugo, as originally believed, but by another. Estelle's gaze narrowed. "Another?" Poirot's voice softened. "Julian Ashcroft." She blinked. "But he only married into the family 7 years ago." "Indeed. But long before he courted Cordelia or began his so-called philanthropic work, Julian had been in close contact with Sir Hugo's financial advisor. It appears that Julian, under a business alias, orchestrated the creation of a second trust, one that mirrored the legitimate Compton charities, but into which he quietly diverted funds. Estelle shook her head slowly. "And Cordelia knew?" Poirot nodded. She discovered the ruse shortly before her death. Not only had Julian deceived Sir Hugo, he had manipulated Cordelia into legitimizing forged documents, believing they were part of a restructure plan. She signed them in good faith. It made her an unwitting accomplice. Estelle's voice trembled. She must have been devastated. She was, Poirot said. But more than that, furious. And determined to correct the record. That is why she confronted Julian, and why she left behind the letter to Rosie. She meant to expose the scheme fully, even if it destroyed the Ashcroft reputation. Estelle's breath caught. But Julian wasn't the killer. No, Poirot said, his eyes distant. Julian feared ruin, but he did not strike the blow. He is a coward and a forger, but not a murderer. Then Sebastian. Poirot steepled his fingers. Sebastian believed he was protecting his family from disgrace. When he overheard Cordelia arguing with Julian, when he found the second set of ledgers hidden in her desk, he panicked. He believed she would expose everything, drag the family into scandal, and collapse the fragile structure that supported them all. Estelle sat back, stunned. He killed her, not to protect himself, but to protect Julian. Poirot nodded. And Sir Hugo, too. The illusion of nobility. The legacy. It all mattered so terribly much to him. But in the end, he committed the only unforgivable act. Estelle lowered her gaze. He didn't even know the full truth, Poirot added. He assumed Cordelia was blackmailing Julian, when in fact, she was trying to exonerate herself. A long silence followed. Finally, Estelle said, "So now what happens?" Poirot folded the letter and placed it gently on the table. "I have already forwarded copies to Inspector Bray. Julian will be charged with fraud, falsification of trust documents, and misappropriation of funds. He will likely serve a prison sentence." Estelle didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was low. "Cordelia was always the strongest of us." Poirot offered a solemn nod. "And the most principled." Estelle stood. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for finishing what she started." He rose with her. "Mademoiselle, it was her clarity that illuminated the truth. I merely followed the light." As she departed, Poirot turned toward the window, where rain gently tapped against the panes. A moment later, Julian entered. His demeanor was altered, not defiant, not apologetic, but tired. "You know everything, don't you?" he said. Poirot didn't turn around. "I know enough." Julian crossed the room slowly. "I never wanted to hurt her. Not really. I thought, if I could just fix things before it got out, if I could somehow make the money right again, she'd forgive me." Poirot looked over his shoulder. "People rarely forgive betrayal, monsieur. They may endure it, but the wound remains." Julian looked away. "I suppose this is where you ask if I'm sorry." Poirot walked past him, retrieving the letter. "No. That is for you and your conscience." He handed Julian a copy. "The inspector will arrive shortly. You should prepare yourself." Julian took the document silently and exited. Poirot remained, now alone with the quiet, the ticking of the mantel clock a metronome of regret. Then a soft knock. Rosie stepped in, her expression unreadable. "I saw Estelle leave. She told me about Julian." Poirot nodded. Rosie crossed her arms. "I keep thinking, if Cordelia had lived another day, would it have changed anything?" Poirot looked at her carefully. "It might have changed everything. Or nothing at all. That, mademoiselle, is the cruelty of time." She hesitated. "Do you think she was afraid, in the end?" Poirot took a moment before answering. "No. I think she had already made peace with the cost of truth. That is a rare courage. Rose's voice wavered. She was like a sister to me. Poirot placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Then honor her by living fully and honestly. She nodded, eyes glistening, and turned away. When the door clicked shut behind her, Poirot finally exhaled. There were still loose ends, the formal proceedings, the legal webs, but the moral center of the mystery had been restored. Cordelia's voice, nearly silenced, had risen again through truth. And in that, there was justice. He looked down at the final ledger. One name remained uncrossed. Sir Hugo. The roots of rot were deeper still. Chapter 10. The Last Confession. Compton Manor stood cloaked in stillness. Not the tension of secrets kept, but the heavy quiet that comes only after they have all been revealed. The rain had ceased. The garden, once wind-blown and battered, now glistened under the pale mid-morning sun. Inside, Hercule Poirot sat in Sir Hugo's study, precisely where the patriarch once commanded his kingdom. The oak-paneled walls loomed tall, books in solemn rows watching over the room like a jury. On the desk before him lay 3 items: the letter from Geneva, a sealed envelope marked Cordelia, and a thin dossier he had retrieved the night before from Sir Hugo's locked cabinet, obtained after Sebastian's final revelation and handed over to Poirot by Estelle with shaking hands. Now, Poirot waited. The door opened. Sir Hugo Compton entered, his steps slower than they had been days ago. His cane tapped softly against the floor. The old man was dressed immaculately as always, cravat, vest, silver cufflinks, but the flame behind his eyes had dimmed. "Mr. Poirot," he said, voice low, "I gather you have summoned me for the end." Poirot inclined his head. "The conclusion, yes. Though whether it is an end or a beginning, I leave to you." Sir Hugo took the armchair opposite, the fire crackling faintly beside them. "I suppose you've learned everything." Poirot leaned forward, resting his fingertips together. "I have learned enough. Enough to know that your silence allowed a tragedy to bloom, and your pride watered it." Sir Hugo's jaw clenched. "My family has always kept its affairs within its own walls. And those walls," Poirot said gently, "have become tombs." A long silence passed between them. Poirot placed the dossier on the desk. "I found this in your private cabinet. Bank correspondences, private ledgers, letters between you and Julian Ashcroft dating back over a decade." Sir Hugo did not look away. "You knew," Poirot said. "You knew what Julian was doing. You knew about the shadow fund. You let it continue." Sir Hugo's voice was calm, almost weary. "I made peace with it. It served its purpose." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Purpose?" "To protect the estate, the charities, the family legacy." He met Poirot's gaze. "I saw what Cordelia was trying to do. She thought exposure would mean justice. But justice, monsieur, is a luxury. Legacy is a burden. She didn't understand that." "Did she threaten to go public?" Sir Hugo exhaled slowly. "She came to me the morning before she died. Told me everything she'd uncovered. Said she would bring it all forward. I asked her to wait, just a week, so I could prepare the family. She refused. She said the truth would be loud, whether we were ready or not." Poirot's voice was quiet now. "And when she walked away, you said nothing. Did nothing, even knowing what that truth might provoke." Sir Hugo's face was stone. "I didn't kill her." "No," Poirot said. "You did not lift the poker. But you allowed the atmosphere in which it happened. You, Sir Hugo, set the fire. Sebastian struck the match." Sir Hugo closed his eyes. Poirot continued. "Julian's fraud will be prosecuted. Sebastian is gone, but the truth of his actions is now known. And you, monsieur, you must live with the consequences. Sir Hugo looked down, his hands shaking slightly on the armrests. Poirot rose, walking to the window. When I first came here, I believed this was a case of simple inheritance. Money, jealousy, perhaps revenge. But no. This was a slow poisoning of conscience. A rot that began with ambition and ended in a death. Sir Hugo stood, leaning on his cane. Then you'll give your report. I already have, Poirot said. But I am no judge. My task is complete. Sir Hugo made for the door, pausing just before he reached it. Did Cordelia leave anything else? Any final words? Poirot turned. She left this. He handed the sealed envelope marked Cordelia. Sir Hugo held it with trembling fingers. Poirot did not wait to see it opened. He turned and walked the long corridor of Compton Manor one final time. The portraits of past Comptons seemed to watch him less arrogantly now, less as guardians of pride, more as silent acknowledgers of what had been lost. At the main hall, he met Estelle and Rosie. It is done, he said softly. Estelle nodded. Is it ever really done? Poirot allowed himself a rare smile. Closure is not the ending of pain, mademoiselle. It is the knowing. And the knowing, that is what sets us free. Rosie stepped forward, a journal in hand. I found this in Cordelia's room, she said. It's hers. Her thoughts. You might want it. Poirot took it, feeling the weight of it. I shall ensure it is preserved. He bowed. Mademoiselle. He stepped outside. The clouds had cleared entirely now, revealing a blue sky untouched by the week's turbulence. The gravel crunched under his shoes as he made his way to the waiting car. As the vehicle pulled away from the manor, Poirot allowed himself a final reflection. It was not merely a murder that had been solved. It was a web, spun over years, sustained by silence and pride. But even in its darkest hour, truth had not been buried forever. It had burned, fiercely, through Cordelia's integrity. And through it, the light of justice had prevailed. And in the end, that was the duty of Hercule Poirot. Not merely to name the killer, but to give voice to the dead.